Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Adrienne, and in this video we are talking about the 5 things I wish I knew before I became a landlord. So if you guys are new to my channel, you may know or you may remember that about a year ago my husband and I moved from the Washington DC area all the way out to the Los Angeles area. And that was because my husband was starting grad school. He had gotten out of the military in the last few years and was able to go use his benefits to get his grad school paid for. And so that's what led us to come out here. But if you've been following my channel for even longer, you'll remember in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, I actually purchased my first home. And that was before I had met my husband, before obviously we started dating, got married, and I lived in that home by myself for 2 years, and then with my husband after we got married for another year before we moved here. And when that whole process was happening of transitioning to moving across the country, I had always wanted to keep my home. It was something I was very proud of purchasing. Selling it at the time was not an option for me. We also knew that we weren't going to be staying here in Southern California long term. We weren't looking to purchase a home here. Also, wouldn't be able to afford a home here anyways. So it's not like we needed the equity, the money that was in that home. So when we moved, we transitioned it to a rental property, and it has been rented out for the last year. And so these are all of the things that I learned in the last year of being a landlord. Recently, over 2.9 billion with a B records were stolen from the National Data Record, which offers personal information for employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and other agencies doing background checks. These were all done by hackers. These stolen records included people's full names, their addresses, their social security numbers, their phone numbers. And this whole thing really hits close to home for me because if you guys have followed my channel for any amount of time, you know I've had family members who have had their identity stolen, and it is a lot of work to rebuild your personal identity once it is stolen. It can really affect somebody's financial life, but really it can affect your personal life. It really is an invasion of privacy for someone to steal your identity. And that's why I'm really grateful for today's sponsor, Aura. Aura can identify data brokers that are exposing your personal information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. These data brokers make a fortune off of selling your personal information, and they sell that information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about you and your life. Legally, these brokers are required to remove your information from these lists when you request it, but honestly, they make it really difficult to do so, which is why Aura is so great because they do all of the heavy lifting for you. Immediately when I started using Aura, they started removing my personal information from dozens of places, many of which I'd honestly never heard of before, and I have no idea how my information got there. Aura is super easy to set up. You don't have to download a bunch of different apps to get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. And even better, Aura is offering my viewers a 2-week completely free trial for you to use. So stop letting other people continue to exploit you and your personal information and go to aura.com/AdrienneInvests to sign up for that 2-week free trial. And I'll also link it down in the description bar below. The first thing I learned is to actually just know my limitations as a landlord. I specifically knew that even from the get-go that this wasn't going to be a home that I was going to be living in for forever. It was actually something I specifically purchased knowing that eventually I would probably outgrow it and it would be turned into a rental property. So I knew that eventually it was going to be turned into a rental property. And I also knew that I do not have the personality of a landlord. Like, I really am not the kind of person to be confrontational. I didn't want to be confrontational with a tenant. I didn't want to have to be the person face to face that they come to if something was wrong. And that's why I went down the road of hiring a property manager that was local to the area. So I ended up vetting 3 different property managers, and I'll say why the first 2 that I didn't go with, and then the third why I ended up going with the third one. The first one was considered a flat fee property management company, and that just meant that every month that it's rented out, or every month that it is in their, not possession, but in their management, they take a flat fee. So no matter what, whether it's rented out or not, they always took out, I think it was like $100. And I didn't like that whole business model, specifically because it didn't give them an incentive to make sure that the property was rented out. the other kind of property management that the other two were percentage based, which just meant that they took a certain percentage out of whatever the property was rented out for. So if the property wasn't rented out, then they weren't making any money. So in that sense, they were incentivized to make sure that the property was rented out. So the last two property managers I looked into were both percentage based, but the reason I didn't go with the second one and I went with a third one is because the third one seemed to be more knowledgeable in a different part of the DC area, but not as knowledgeable in the part where this rental property was. And they gave me an estimate as to what they think it could go for, and it was much lower than I knew it could go for, about $700 less than what it ended up going for with the third property manager. And that's why I ended up choosing a property manager that was percentage based. So I think in the overall grand scheme of things, that was the best decision for me, especially being long distance. I don't think it would have been easy for me to be able to manage a property from so far away, on top of the fact that like I have my own job and it does take a lot of work to manage a property. Even like me not being really hands-on with it, like there are things that have come up where I did need to be a part of it, and it's not something that I want to take any more of my brain capacity. The second thing that I learned being a landlord for the past year is that things are going to break. Lots of things. It was naive of me to even think like I could go into this and be like, things aren't gonna break. I left my home in really good condition. I take care of it. No. This was probably the most expensive year in terms of maintenance that I've had with my home. And I don't know if that's just because I'm away from it. It's now a rental property and I am really tracking all of my expenses so that I can do my taxes correctly. But regardless, it was a very expensive year. And so I think I wish I would have known how expensive it was going to be. The main things that happened that we had to pay for to get repaired, this was actually before it became a rental, but while we were still living there, we were gonna have to do this anyways, but we found that there was a water leak in the upstairs bathroom, which we had to get fixed. So we pretty much had like I'd say the whole bathroom upstairs was like 65% new, and that cost us about $4,500. Essentially, we had to replace all of the copper wiring in the home. The home was built in the 70s, and I think they used like aluminum wiring. Honestly, I don't know, but we had to replace the wiring in order for the insurance policy to continue covering. And that cost $3,300. That was around December. And then in February, we had a water leak, and that was $2,300. And actually, when that happened, the person who went in and repaired it, who has been a contractor that I've known for a really long time and did work on my family home, said to me that the pipes did not look very good. And so to be prepared in the future to have to replace more of them. So we had quite a few major expenses. We had some other smaller expenses in terms of maintenance, but nothing major as these three. And so I think what I learned is just how important it is to have, like, yes, Noah and I have a solid emergency fund for like our personal life. If something happened, we still needed to live, we still needed to pay our rent, but it was almost like we needed to have a separate emergency fund for the property to make sure it ran just in case of whatever happened. And that included like, what if we can't get a tenant for a certain period of time? And then also, like I said, it was really important. I started tracking all of the expenses that the property was having, but I was organizing it in a way that just made sense to me, but it actually didn't really make sense for when I did our taxes. And so I recreated an entire spreadsheet to just make doing our taxes a lot easier. Every month I go in and I put in what expenses they have. The property management company makes it really easy just because they send me a document every month, which makes, for me, having the property management worth it, even though it does cost money. I didn't say this in the first point, but the property management charges 1 month's rent to find a tenant, and then they also charge 7.9% per month that they manage it. So to me, yeah, it's probably one of the bigger expenses, and it takes a huge mental load off of me. So for me, it's worth it. I can see how for other people it wouldn't be worth it if you have a certain personality or if you enjoy doing things like that. I am just not one of those people. The third thing that I learned, and I'm really glad I did this, I'm not even sure where I learned this from, but when we transitioned the home into a rental property, we got rid of our homeowner's insurance because we weren't living in the home, and we got landlord insurance. Landlord insurance is a little bit more expensive than homeowner's insurance just because you're having renters who are probably not going to be taking as good care of the home as an owner would be, and I got that from the get-go, and that really saved our butts when we had the water leak. So the second water leak, not the one in the upstairs bathroom, but the second water leak that we had, we weren't able to get any insurance money for the actual leak, but the leak caused damage to other parts of the home, and we were able to get a significant amount of insurance money to cover all of that, and that really helped with those costs. So landlord insurance, super important to get if you were going into renting out a property. The fourth thing that I learned is that sometimes it is more cost effective to keep a tenant at the current rent that they're at than to raise the rent and try and get a tenant at the new rent. This is actually what we initially tried to do with the current tenant, because all the reports I got from the property management was that the current tenant was like really proud of the home and really took care of the home. They paid on time, and that was another thing why I really liked the property management, is because they vetted a tenant, so they do all of the background checks, and I just don't think I'm knowledgeable enough to be able to go forward and do that on my own. We offered to the tenant that they could stay at their current rent, even though the rental market is doing really well in that area, but they decided not to stay. So they ended up moving out, and we raised the rent. It took us maybe a couple weeks to find a new tenant, but the tenant is not moving in for another few weeks. So there is a month period that the home is not being occupied. If the tenant had wanted to stay at the current rent that they were at, it would have cost us less in terms of the overall grand scheme of things, even though the new tenant is going to be paying a higher rent. I think I wanted to be somebody who was like, I'm always going to increase the rent. Like, I don't want the tenant to feel like they own this home, but the math just didn't quite make sense. And I'm not saying that I would do that for a long period of time, but that is just what we did this year. And so we have a new tenant moving in. And the fifth thing that I really learned in this whole process doesn't exactly have to do with renting our property, but was that if you're looking to purchase a rental property, so a property that you're intending to rent out, you have a better chance of making more money in a lower cost area than a more expensive area, if that makes sense. So people are more likely to rent in an area that's more affordable. People who are looking to live in an area that's more expensive are likely going to have more money and are more likely going to either buy or look to rent in an affordable place to be able to save for a nicer property. So I think that's something I really learned and I thought was really interesting, simply because you'd think if you can afford a nice property, you should be able to rent it out for a lot. Those are the 5 things that I wish I knew before I became a landlord. Make sure you check out aura.com/AdrienneInvest to get that 2-week free trial of Aura. Make sure you subscribe and share this video with your friends, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.